Over the past months, a growing number of local authorities, businesses, and community leaders across the United Kingdom have been raising the same concern. Not about one protest, not about a single night of disorder, but about a pattern that refuses to settle. Tensions that rise, ease, and then resurface, sometimes days later, sometimes weeks later, often in different locations, yet following a familiar trajectory. Britain has experienced periods of public unrest before. That, in itself, is not new. What feels different now is the persistence. Even after immediate events pass, even after official statements are released, even after public attention shifts elsewhere, the underlying pressure remains. The question many observers are now asking is not what happened most recently, but why the conditions for unrest seem to remain in place. It's a question that doesn't have a simple answer, but it's one that demands attention because the pattern itself has become the story. Not the individual incidents, but the fact that they keep happening. Not the specific locations, but the sense that no location feels entirely immune. And not the particular grievances being expressed, but the deeper reality that those grievances aren't finding resolution. Reports emerge from urban centers, commercial districts, residential areas, different events, but similar language appears in the official accounts. Authorities use terms like isolated, contained, under review. These aren't dishonest descriptions. Most situations are contained. Most don't spiral beyond a few tense hours. But the cumulative effect of hearing these same phrases again and again creates its own narrative. It suggests that while each incident might be managed in the moment, the underlying conditions that produce them are not being addressed. This isn't about collapse. It's about accumulation. Each event adds to a collective memory of instability. Each response, however professional, reinforces the sense that this is now simply how things are. And when that becomes the accepted baseline, when people start expecting disruption rather than being surprised by it, something fundamental has shifted. The question becomes not whether tensions will flare up again, but when and where. That shift in expectation changes everything. It changes how people plan their days, where they choose to go, how they feel about their communities. It changes how businesses operate, how events are organized, how public spaces are managed. Even when nothing is actively happening, the shadow of what might happen shapes behavior. So how do these situations typically evolve? They usually begin as organized gatherings, demonstrations, protests, public events where people come together around a shared purpose or grievance. The vast majority remain peaceful. People show up, they make their voices heard, they go home, but some don't follow that trajectory. Some shift from organized expression to something more volatile. The transition often happens quickly. A confrontation between opposing groups, a misunderstanding about boundaries or permissions, a reaction to police presence, or a reaction to the absence of police presence. What matters isn't always the specific trigger. What matters is that the environment is primed for escalation. When crowds are dense, when emotions are high, when communication breaks down, small incidents can amplify rapidly. A shove becomes a scuffle. A scuffle draws more people in. More people means more complexity, more voices, more potential for things to spin beyond anyone's control. And once that happens, the response becomes reactive rather than preventive. Police move in to separate groups, to establish control, to prevent further escalation. Their presence is necessary, but it also changes the dynamic. For some, it's reassuring. For others, it's provocative. And that division in how authority is perceived is itself part of the underlying tension. Because when a significant portion of the public views intervention as aggression rather than protection, even the most measured response can be interpreted as confirmation of their grievances. The key point here is that most situations don't escalate, but the possibility is always there. And it's that constant possibility that shapes collective behavior. People adjust their routines not based on what has happened, but on what might happen. They avoid certain areas at certain times. They keep a closer eye on the news. They make contingency plans. This isn't paranoia. It's a rational response to an environment where predictability has diminished. And that diminished predictability is exhausting. It requires constant low-level vigilance, a background awareness that wasn't necessary before, or at least didn't feel necessary. Now consider how this pattern gets amplified through digital channels. When something does happen, it's documented immediately. Multiple angles, multiple perspectives, all uploaded within minutes. These clips spread rapidly across social media platforms, reaching audiences far beyond those who were physically present. And what gets shared isn't usually the full context. It's the most intense moment, the confrontation, the chaos, the collision. This isn't necessarily deliberate distortion. It's just how platforms work. Content that generates strong emotional reactions gets prioritized by algorithms. The result is that people see the peak moments repeatedly while missing the hours of calm that came before and after. They see multiple incidents from multiple locations, compressed into a single scrolling session, creating an impression of constant disorder even when the actual frequency might be relatively low. Perception is often shaped less by scale and more by frequency. When people encounter footage of unrest every few days, even if each incident is isolated and contained, the cumulative effect is a sense that things are spiraling. The reality might be that 99% of days are peaceful, but the 1% that isn't gets magnified to the point where it dominates the narrative. This matters enormously because public perception drives public behavior, which in turn influences the conditions on the ground. When communities feel unsafe, they withdraw. When they withdraw, public spaces become less populated. When spaces are less populated, they become easier targets for disorder because there are fewer witnesses, fewer people invested in maintaining calm. It's a feedback loop where fear of instability contributes to the conditions that make instability more likely. Now let's consider the operational realities faced by those responsible for managing these situations. Police forces across the UK are dealing with multiple competing demands simultaneously. Public order situations are just one part of their mandate. They're also responding to crime, managing traffic, handling domestic incidents, supporting mental health crises. Resources are finite. Personnel are finite. When multiple events require attention at the same time, difficult choices have to be made about where to deploy officers and in what numbers. This isn't an abstract management problem. It has real consequences. Response times lengthen when units are stretched thin. Coverage gaps emerge. The ability to prevent escalation weakens simply because there are not enough people in enough places to intervene before situations deteriorate. Add to this the fact that officers are making decisions in real time, often with incomplete information, under immense pressure, and with the knowledge that every action will be scrutinized afterward. They have to balance firmness with restraint, authority with de-escalation, action with patience. Too heavy-handed, and they're accused of brutality. Too cautious, and they're accused of allowing disorder to flourish. The standards they're held to are often contradictory, and the criticism comes from all directions. This isn't to excuse failures when they occur, but it is to acknowledge that the operational environment is extraordinarily complex. Officers aren't policymakers. They don't control immigration policy, economic conditions, or social cohesion. They respond to the situations those policies and conditions create. And increasingly, they're being asked to manage problems that don't have tactical solutions. You can disperse a crowd, but you can't disperse frustration. You can restore order to a street, but you can't restore trust in institutions. Those are longer-term challenges that require different kinds of interventions entirely. The impact on local communities is profound and often underestimated. Shop owners adjust their hours, closing earlier than they'd like because they're concerned about potential unrest in the evening. Families avoid certain areas, not because violence is happening constantly, but because they're not sure what they might encounter. Events get canceled or postponed as a precaution. Public transport routes are altered. Schools send students home early when there's word that something might be building. Even when nothing happens, the expectation that something might is enough to change daily behavior. And this has costs. Economic costs, as businesses lose revenue. Social costs, as communities fragment and people retreat into smaller, more familiar circles. Psychological costs, as the background level of stress and vigilance takes a toll over time. People adapt, as humans always do, but adaptation shouldn't be confused with resolution. Communities are adjusting to instability rather than addressing it, and that adjustment comes at a price. So what's driving this persistent tension? Part of it is economic. The cost of living has been rising steadily. Wages haven't kept pace. Housing is increasingly unaffordable for many. Household budgets are tighter, and financial insecurity creates stress that spills into other areas of life. When people feel they can't get ahead, when they're working hard but still struggling, frustration builds. And that frustration needs an outlet. Sometimes it finds expression in productive ways, through community organizing or political engagement. But sometimes it finds expression in anger, directed at whoever is perceived as responsible for their difficulties. Part of it is social. Questions about immigration, national identity, cultural change, these aren't abstract debates. People experience them in their neighborhoods, their schools, their workplaces, and when those experiences feel unsettling, when change feels too rapid or too imposed, resistance emerges. This doesn't mean the resistance is justified or that the concerns are always based in fact. But it does mean the feelings are real, and when feelings aren't addressed, they don't disappear. They intensify. Part of it is institutional. Trust in government, in media, in traditional sources of authority has been eroding for years. When people don't trust the institutions that are supposed to serve them, they become more likely to take matters into their own hands, to organize outside official channels, to express dissent in ways that authorities can't easily manage. This erosion of trust is slow, cumulative, and difficult to reverse. It's built from years of perceived failures, broken promises, and experiences where official explanations didn't match lived reality. And part of it is digital. The same technologies that connect us also isolate us. We inhabit information ecosystems that reinforce what we already believe. We see the world through filters, algorithmic and social, that confirm our fears and validate our anger. This doesn't mean people are stupid or easily manipulated. It means the environment in which we process information is fundamentally different than it was a generation ago, and we're still learning how to navigate it without losing our ability to see beyond our own perspective. None of these factors alone would be sufficient to create persistent tension. But together, they form an environment where pressure is constant, where grievances accumulate faster than they're addressed, and where the mechanisms that used to diffuse tension, community ties, institutional authority, shared narratives, have weakened. So why doesn't the tension just dissipate over time? Why doesn't it burn itself out? Because the underlying conditions remain. Structural problems take years to address, and the political will to address them often wavers. Policy responses are fragmented, partial, slow to implement. And in the meantime, each new incident reactivates the anxiety. Someone sees footage, shares it, discusses it. The debate reignites. The divisions deepen. The sense that nothing is improving gets reinforced. It's not that any single event is catastrophic. Most aren't. But the pattern creates a cumulative psychological effect. Each incident adds weight to all the previous ones. People stop asking why this particular thing happened and start assuming this is just how things are now. That assumption is corrosive. It normalizes instability. It makes disorder feel inevitable rather than preventable. And when people believe nothing can change, they stop looking for solutions. They harden their positions. They prepare for the next flare-up instead of working to prevent it. There are discussions happening, of course. Debates about policing strategies, about how to manage large gatherings more effectively, about when to intervene and when to hold back. Conversations about public communication, about how quickly and transparently information should be shared, about how to counter misinformation without appearing defensive. Discussions about urban planning, about which spaces are suitable for large events, about what infrastructure improvements might reduce risk. These are all necessary conversations. But they're also insufficient, because the tensions we're seeing aren't fundamentally about tactics or logistics. They're about deeper fractures in how people understand their place in society, and how they relate to authority, and how they see the future. And those fractures don't heal through better crowd management techniques. They heal through sustained engagement, through dialogue, through policies that address the root causes of frustration, rather than just managing its symptoms. The challenge now is not simply responding to individual incidents as they occur. It's understanding why the environment that allows them to happen keeps resetting rather than resolving. Public order is not just about what unfolds on a single evening. It's about whether communities feel stability returning afterward. It's about whether people trust that their concerns are being heard and addressed, not just managed and contained. Until the conditions that sustain this cycle are addressed, economic insecurity, institutional distrust, social fragmentation, the amplification of division through digital platforms, the pattern is likely to continue. Not dramatically, not explosively, but persistently. Different places, different moments. The same underlying tension waiting to surface again.